Who is your neighbor? Howdy, friends. One of my videos received a comment from someone talking about the story of the Good Samaritan. In the video, I had talked about loving your neighbor, and the commenter was pointing out that the story of the Good Samaritan tells us who our neighbor is, and to look to that story to find out who our neighbor is. And what I took from it, the implication was that people who treat you in the way that the Good Samaritan treated the person along the roadside, that's your neighbor. And people who just pass by him, those people are not your neighbor. That's debatable. I think that really what Jesus was getting at with that parable was getting to the feeling of superiority that the Pharisees and the Sadducees held over people like Samaritans. One of the reasons I believe this is because regardless of who your neighbor is, he didn't just say to love your neighbor. He said to love the least of these. And it does say the least of these, my brethren. So I've heard people say, well, that's only specifically talking about believers. So the least among the believers. Okay. And I can see where you might get that. But let me read a passage to you from Matthew chapter 5 and starting at verse 43. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. It would be a very difficult thing to be perfect in the sense of keeping all of the commandments in the Torah or in all of the legalistic requirements. And it's a very hard thing to be perfect in any sense. And we can debate whether or not it's possible, but I think perfection becomes much more realistic to strive toward when we're talking about perfection in love. And that's what Jesus is talking about here, is loving people who may not necessarily be your neighbor. So I don't think that using who is and isn't your neighbor is a sufficient cop-out. Love them all. They're all made in God's image.